There are moments which mark your life, moments when you realize nothing will ever be the same, and time is divided into two parts, before this and after this. Now sometimes you can feel such a moment coming. That's the test, or so I tell myself. I tell myself that at times like that, strong people keep moving forward anyway, no matter what they're going to find.
Come closer.
Transmission will start in 5
I want to talk to you. I'm going to tell you an astounding story.
It's almost like a symphony of different elements that are very carefully brought together to provide exquisite enjoyment.
Reposing on lush carpets, surrounded by perfume and music, the good life.
For the right to rule the world.
Who debated the nature of God, the subtleties of philosophy, or the most recent mathematical revelations. The good life.
An ancient prophecy told
While they dined on spiced delicacies served on Chinese porcelains.
the greatest power on earth.
What is this?
What's an ancient puzzle that contains the meaning of life?
Yes, ladies and gents. Welcome. Welcome to one and all. This is Storytime, episode 17. awakening. What a grand old time we are going to have this evening. I hope you're ready for it. I'm not. And I'm the host of your StoryTime session this evening, Euphoria. So, you know it's going to be a wild ride. All you can do is just sort of roll with it. And you'll see that that is one of our main themes this evening. As we approach this incredible flood of information that's coming at every step of the way throughout the week, there is a great change to the zeitgeist of humanity. This information is coming to us thick and fast. And specifically, whether you're looking at disclosure, UFOs, UAPs, that sort of business, or if you're looking at declassification of CIA, Kennedy assassination documents, or just all manners of political corruption, Hunter Biden laptops, Durham reports, it's all just coming out as a big fat torrent, a nice piping of just truth being sent into the giant openness of society. Now we must make of these things what we want. And what do we do with all of this information? A lot of us don't really have world powers to make it our business. We're kind of trying to do our own thing, run our own lives. And so what do we do with this great big swath of information that really does change the foundation about how we not only interact with the world, but live in it? This is not only how the world changes us, but how we plan to change it in the future. So, as I said, the big theme this evening is what to do with this over-sensory blast of mind-changing information coming through to the human race at this moment in time. How do we ground ourselves? What do we do with this info? And where do we put it in its correct place so that it creates the right kind of geometry that we need to go forward? So, welcome to StoryTime 17. It's my great pleasure to beam to you from Johannesburg, South Africa, the Southern Hemisphere. It is the 9th of July, just a little past 10 in the evening here in Johannesburg. So with a little bit of internet and electricity, we're going to try and make the most of it and beam this message to you, which is there are things that you find that pop out when you squeeze history and your current moment in time and you compress them together. Lots of mystery comes out. There's a lot that we think we understood and a lot that we think we currently understand about who we are as humans and where we come from and what is our collective story. And we're going to challenge some of those things this evening. Now, for those of you that have not joined us, this is basically our little thing on a Sunday evening. I am Euphoria, I come on the internet, I talk some shiz, and you make of it whatever you wish. You keep your skepticals on, clear and concise. Thinking will often point out to you that I'm just some random dude on the internet not here to try and convince you of anything. But as I say, we're really busy, and not everyone has the time to join these dots. Not even I. I learn from you, as you learn from me. It's a two-way street. As always, you're welcome. Comments, questions, emails, all these things. We'll get into that later. But in this dialectic of story time, as I said, if you're new here, we try and join these interesting dots and make a little picture if we can. And hopefully this picture gives you little grains of high-quality information. I try my best. I misspeak, I make mistakes. So, as I say, take a little bit of a pinch of salt, but often, even if you take 1% of what we go through here in story time, and you say, okay, fair enough, That's worth looking into. That's a rabbit hole I'm going to go have to research myself. Guarantee that you'll come across things that will change you profoundly. All of these things are linked together. And that's our big aim here at Storytime. We're 17 episodes deep and many hours of video. And still, we're getting that whole picture into focus. So that's kind of what we do here. And we have a little bit of a laugh as we go along, because it really is a bit of a clown world these days, truly speaking. So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to episode 17. I called this episode Awakening because, as I said, there is a lot our race has to consider at this moment in time. A lot. We once held our own personal beliefs about different things. Call it superstitions, if you will. Some people believed in ghosts, some people believed in aliens, some people believed in time travel and superpowers and clones and humanity being already off-world in some kind of a breakaway civilization, and maybe ancient destruction or a civilization that came before us with technology that superseded what we have today. Maybe a technology that was vastly different from our own. These considerations, I'm going to posit this to you. These considerations, even if they are not factually true, they are important for us to think about. I'm going to give you my personal opinion. It'll become quite clear if it hasn't already for those of you watching Storytime. I'll give you my opinion towards the end, but for now we'll just sort of stick to the this and that's that have come our way. But what I'm trying to say here is that the joy of a sci-fi story, the joy of a fantasy story, the joy of the human imagination, as it were, is really to try and push the boundaries of our understanding and try and reach into a possible future and bring back from it some kind of understanding, maybe some kind of experience. Sometimes it's not just a technical knowledge, but a sense of a something. And these feelings are familiar to us as human beings. It comes to us in different ways. Serendipitous coincidences, or snap telepathy, or all kinds of weird synchronicities that we sometimes just dismiss as, coincidence or a random chance just happening to happen. But I'm here to tell you this evening that the human mind is a bit more complicated than that. So much so that it's even caught the interest of militaries and governments and all kinds of nefarious and shady organizations, unfortunately. There's something special about being, about existing. Maybe even about being and existing as a human. Not only, but the main point is this. There's something special going on here. We don't quite understand what it is. The evidence is not hard, clear 100%. Is it ever? But if we consider these, for the moment, let's call them stories. Whatever your stories or beliefs are that shape your world and your understanding, keep them to yourself, guide them, harness them. They are personal to you. I'm not saying don't share them. I'm not saying don't confront them with other people's understandings. That's the whole joy of a dialectic. It's how you sharpen your information. It's the whole point of this program. But keep it as something that forms your groundwork. Challenge it often. Because if it's not good foundation, you don't want to keep that kind of information. And to help you extend your mind into the future, things like fantasy and sci-fi help us consider things that at the moment are not actual, are not real, but maybe in the near future, or not too distant future, we will find ourselves having to consider. I think the ancients even just like 100 and something years ago, would have never thought that we kept in our pockets. I have my cell phone near me, but you know, something like a cell phone or a tablet or a smartwatch. I mean, you have the whole internet at your disposal. Almost every video, millions of people's thoughts and photos, and it's just an incredible amount of information at our fingertips, instantly. It's magic. For anyone in the 1500s, you know? And for them, they used other methods. Maybe not exactly sci-fi per se, maybe not fantasy per se, perhaps closer something to religion, maybe something closer to spiritualism or the mystery schools. A lot of these folk, like Edgar Cayce, spoke of interesting kinds of technologies that at the time made no sense. Flying vehicles, races that had telepathic abilities, and clean sources of energy that was so powerful that it destroyed this place, the Atlantis collective, because it wasn't just one city. Apparently, it was like a whole global cataclysm. The Two-Eye Stone, the great and mighty and terrible Two-Eye Stone. But what I'm trying to say here is basically that through imagination, through maybe even a certain kind of trance, let's call it, humans have had the ability to not only imagine, but bring information from some kind of, let's call it inspiration, let's call it another dimension of information, let's call it just blind luck of being in a state of creative, I don't know, flow. Call it whatever you will. But the fact is, humans have a propensity for great creativity because we somehow bring these things out of the ether that we didn't know before, didn't try before, and we challenge ourselves to push boundaries. That is the creative spark inside of humanity that just, you know, we are creative creatures, we're curious creatures. And this fundamental seeking is an important thing. It can sometimes bring us to great discovery. Maybe not even in terms of inventions, but in terms of our own understanding of ourselves. I mean, imagine, let's think of, you know, a technology, for example, the first time man discovered fire. What that must have done for our psychological understanding to know that this was once a destructive force that was to be run away from, and now we could control it, harness it, make it a technology. What did that do to our understanding of the world? Where once maybe we thought of fire as a god that was angry and would now and again just come and burn everything to the ground, you know, from some lightning or whatever the case was, you know, natural bushfire or something. But once we understood it, the technology changed us and changed our direction through history. And if you don't even look at a technology, but at personal experiences, if you look at, I'm trying to think of a good example. But one of my favorites, I mean, it's maybe not the best, but it's one that's dear to me, is the story of Neil Donald Walsh. He's an author that wrote the book Conversations with God. Very good book. I don't like his other stuff personally, but that book came to me at the right time, and I could read it for the great metaphysics it had to offer. And the story basically is that he had had great troubles in his life, and he wrote an angry letter to God, and he was scribbling down on a piece of paper, you know, why this? If, you know, this is the case, you know, give me an answer. And intuitively, his hand just wrote a response. And then he read it, and there was now a dialogue, and he wrote a question, and then came an answer, and then came a book. Well, at least that's how the story goes. But the point of that is, like, that's not a technology, that's a personal experience that he shares. And many find very interesting connections in that dialogue. You know, some people might say, oh, well, that's just the results of a very overactive imagination. He thinks he's talking to God, but he's actually just talking to himself. Maybe. But as I say, there's a lot of really good metaphysics in it, and the personal experience that he has is, I think, something that we all experience at least once in our lifetime, something life-changing that really gets deep under our skin. Now, I'm referring to these things before we jump straight into our story time, good and proper, and look at all the amazing this and that's that I have for you this evening. I'm mentioning these two types of technologies that, well, not really technologies, but they are either physical things, technologies, or wisdoms, mechanics that we come to understand and master, like a fire, or a bicycle, or an electrical engine, or experience. So, you know, even as like children, when we first fall down, that is an experience. It's not a physical technology like an engine, but it helps us grow. It helps us widen our understanding. And a lot of this comes from future thinking, future wondering, from our curiosity spark as human. So anyways, I'm blabbering a lot, but what I'm really trying to say is this. The creative spark inside of all of humanity makes us reach our minds into other places to bring forward things that help us grow, both physically, spiritually, and psychosocially. You know, a lot of these concepts like universal laws of consideration. A universal law is something that if everybody followed, it doesn't unbalance. You know, if you make a law that you can't apply to everyone across the board, it's not a golden law, and so it needs to be looked at, some people say. And so a golden law like consideration or, you know, do not steal, these are really good laws that you can apply across the board. And so they make good, profound grounding into our foundations. And this helps us, as I say, slowly climb up the ladder of understanding. And I'm mentioning all of this because I want us to have a clear mind as we jump into our stories and questions of mind control and MK Ultra and UAPs. And I mean, we're going to get deep into it. But this is really what I want to start and end with. Human experience is complicated. Life is, we don't understand it completely. It is quite precious. There's little in this universe we don't have very good answers to. But all we know is that even at the level of UAPs, we see this intersect of technologies and consciousness kind of merging. And I say this because we need to start having really big imaginations for all the stuff that's coming in the news these days. When we're talking about ancient civilizations, recovering ET bodies, back engineering, you know, propulsion technology and energy sources, 0 point this and that, and quantum communications, it's wild. And it's coming just all recently, you know. Luckily, you know, through StoryTime, we've been tracking some of this, but we need to have big imaginations no matter what point we are in history, because that brings us to better tools for trying to digest It's a great big mysterious universe. And again, I'm just going to make this last point before we dive in. Your mind, your experience, your being in this reality, it is fleeting, but a precious thing. If, it's kind of, my, I don't want to get too philosophical on this, but one of my best ways of looking at this, I love philosophy. It's one of the things I studied in university. Metaphysics is my favorite study. And often when I say metaphysics, people think New Age, what, and crystals, and no. Proper metaphysics, going back to the ancient Greeks and even further back, talks about the very nature and essence of what is reality. And one of the most interesting themes that keeps coming up is that the universe doesn't need to be here. Could it just, or if it did create itself, or a universe was created, why have consciousness? Why not just have rocks and trees and simple animal organisms that... Why have complex phenomena like creative souls that, have this whole locking into time for a certain amount, and they experience things and they recycle back into the universe? It's kind of poetic that the universe kind of needs observers to see itself. If you look at it through simulation theory, it kind of makes sense. It's like if you have a hard drive full of information, all the information in the universe, let's say that is supreme creator, the all of everything. But if nothing is actually processing that information, it's all just stuck in time. It's all just static. It's only when something starts reading, and reading information takes time. You can't, unless you're reading everything all at once and then you go back to that static sense of all-encompassing omnipresence. That's why you need these little individual observers, so that the universe can look in upon itself and grow and recreate, possibly, new experiences. It's a easy way of thinking it is like when I was little, someone explained it to me kind of like, and this is my personal belief, you don't have to believe this, but it fits a lot of understanding for me. It's kind of like this concept that God is the book. God is the book of everything. Anything that can exist, it's a blank page. It all goes there. There's space for everything. But what picks this or that over, everything doesn't all just happen at once. We're locked in a little timeline. So the creator is you. You're the pen. God is the book that you're writing in. It holds the universe and every possible thing that the universe can be, is, was, and will be. But what makes light on this reality, or that reality, or this moment in history, or that moment in history, seems to be your consciousness. That seems to lock us in a tunnel of time. Now, I'm getting all philosophic and esoteric about this matter because, again, we're about to dive into some, the usual StoryTime stuff, CIA cover-ups of mind control and that sort of business. But at the end of the day, and this is the main message, I'm going to just try hammer in one more time, and then I promise we will get into it. But your consciousness is important in some way that we don't understand exactly, but we can see that life and humanity have a interesting coexistence. The world could have just been blackness and darkness, but information always seems to come, even from a perfect vacuum. You can never get a perfect vacuum. Information always seems to come out of this nothingness. And that's quantum mechanics talking. That's not even me. So The universe tends to, information begets information. And this is an important theme to ground us as we blast through this wall of PSY-OPS, because this is really what we're dealing with here. The underbelly. The underbelly of governments and militaries and just vacuous organizations. They don't have our best interests at heart. So let's jump straight into it. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Welcome to Storytime, number 17, chapter 17 as it were. We're looking at the awakening, and that's why we're spending some time just talking about our place in this universe and why trying to find information at its core and our story that leads up to that information is important to sort of drive us through history in the way we want, and not just swerving haphazardly or hijacked by other people. So, we're going to touch on a few things here. And as I mentioned, we're in an information-rich reality at the moment. Everyone has access to the internet, even at a very, very young age. And that's, just how things are. Maybe it's good, maybe it's bad. Like any technology, it's how you use it. That's my belief. But really, this information, this instant information, is bringing forward great revelation. And I don't mean this in a biblical sense, because my background, although also philosophy, is politics, international relations. That's my, I love that sort of business. But what I'm trying to say here is, when you look at things like the Durham report, the Hunter Biden laptop, the recent collapses of government in recently Holland. Last week it was France. The week before that it was Russia. Italy's not looking so good. The UK, you have people running around with, primeval weapons in the parks, having sword fights, and we're really into a cusp in our societal glue. This system has reached a bit of a breaking point, in my opinion. And so it's interesting to figure out why that is. And congratulations to those people in the Netherlands who managed to get De Ruyter's resignation. I am very, very proud of you, Amandla. And that man has been in power for a very, very long time, and imposing laws that people do not want. It's great to see that the Netherlands, even at a very, very extreme push that the people had to go to, were able to take back part of their government. In many places, it's a bit of a losing battle, or a long struggle, depending how you look at it. Now, as I said, this topic of revelations isn't just politics. It's also this UAP business. I mean, we have really credible politicians. Before we were called conspiracy theories. If you started talking about aliens, UFOs, just even experiences that were not scientifically driven. You were kooky. You were, sidelined. You were completely marginalized as a regular person in, polite society. You sort of kept that for your family dinner table around Christmas time, Now, look where we are. Now we're at a point where not only has, the US military created a whole new branch of their armed forces in the form of Space Force, but they're having UAP hearings. They've mandated recently all these aerospace companies to list all the exotic materials that they have in their possession, all the technologies. They want lists, the government, Congress. That's interesting, because some people are telling me that, that's now where the scuttle The helter and skelter begins as they try and burn the evidence and make it disappear. And that's the joy of a unacknowledged special access program, is that basically a handful of people know, and it's their bread and butter to make sure that no one else does. And so they don't have to file any documents, they don't have to do anything. We'll look this evening about how they even have their own source of funding, their own operations. We looked at, in previous story times, at breakaway civilizations, just the last one, and in previous ones, what happens when you get a group of humans that get too big for their boots and have access to incredible power, that they think and believe that they are custodians because they deserve it over everyone else, and so that they are first favored. They deserve to know the truth. They deserve to make decisions for humanity when emergencies come. And in previous story times, we saw how they can actually create these emergencies and just take our rights away from us without it being in any way legitimate. So, that's not our topic for this evening. Let's dive into our first, because I want to try and give you an example of this thing. As I said, if you were talking about some of this stuff, you were considered a conspiracy theorist. If you kept your eye on the ball, now not everything, but a lot of what conspiracy theorists believe is starting to come true, at least in the UAP world. I mean, there's obviously been wild misinformation, disinformation. Of course, it's all PSY-OPS. We've been through this through many story times. The deliberate infiltration and twisting of the truth, because those that know the truth know how to steer you completely away from it. And if you get too close, well, we'll see what happens when you come across the CIA's assassination program. Goodness gracious, let's get into this business, shall we? The first piece of news I would like to bring to you is actually something I missed in 2 episodes prior. When we introduced the now coming new, I don't think it's in stone yet, but the likely new head of NORAD and Northcom, which is General Gillot, who will replace Glenn von Herk. And we talked about how Northcom and NORAD have this integrated system for continuation of governments. What I found super interesting there was that as this exchange happened recently between von Herk, who is now, after only 2 years, getting replaced by Gillot, he says, I needed more information, but now I understand that there's a space force, so we have these conflicting overlaps, and so I understand that they want to take care of many of these responsibilities. That's fine, but I need to know about them. And if I can't, then maybe I'm not your man. And then they were like, well, maybe you're not our man. I've oversimplified the story there, but I think that's basically it. And in this exchange, good old Van Herk talks about the Rudolph and Santa project. Now, let me try and ground this. And whilst I'm doing that, let me just bring up this article here so that we can just start having a look. Now, this is from Air and Space Forces. And you can see May 31st, it's not that long ago. And this is the article that basically taps Gillot as the new NORAD commander. Now, NORAD is the entity responsible for tracking everything around the North American continent. Because this comes from the fear of the nuclear strikes of the Soviet Cold War. And that's why we had such a good laugh when they would say, oh, we had a domain awareness gap and some balloons got through. Whoops, we need more money and secrecy. No, that's not how it works, because these guys are really super advanced, and the more witnesses and testimony and evidence comes out, we see that they are far beyond the capacities and capabilities that they lead us to believe. And so Northcom has this space operation, because space is one of the quickest ways that you can have nuclear deterrence, or if you wanted to, create a nuclear strike. So not only is it a surveillance and reconnaissance platform, these satellites above the Earth, or around the Earth, I should say, but NORAD is the most sort of advanced group that deal with that. And now it's starting to overlap with Space Force. And in this exchange, we hear about Rudolph and Santa. What's that got to do with anything? Now, as a bit of a gag, as I said, NORAD tracks all these things in the air. Around Christmas time, they have this this very bizarre, thing where they track Santa Claus. So you see here, it says, come back 1st of December. Now, this is really weird. It's like NORAD is basically the highest pinnacle of military offensive capabilities, defensively and offensively speaking. And it is one of the great implicators and possible like global destructors to humanity, because if NORAD detects a threat, an incoming nuclear strike, it will retaliate with everything, mutually assured destruction. And so this is an entity that not only can destroy the world with nuclear and whatever other secret weapons they've got, scalar or otherwise, but they also have this continuation of government component that if in a certain kind of an emergency, Northcom, along with NORAD and all of that good stuff, they'll suspend a constitution, and Canada and America will just be words on paper that you can use as a carpet. I was going to say something a little bit more obscene, but basically the military will just come and stick you in a bunker. In fact, Lex Friedman had a super interesting conversation with our good friend, well, not good friend, I mean, he doesn't know we even exist, but we enjoy the rise that of his political prominence because we kind of called it on this program, and that's good old Bobby Kennedy, RFK Jr. And he had this interesting exchange with Lex Friedman. He was on the Lex Friedman podcast recently, and he was telling the story. Oh goodness, I wonder if I can find it. I'm sure I can. He was telling the story about how when he was a little kid, and there was the Cuban Missile Crisis, and he had, the National Guard basically come and say, well, okay, kids, it's time to whisk you into an underground bunker. Don't worry, it's got a McDonald's. You can live down there for a few months while the Earth gets scorched by nuclear apocalypse. And the one interesting thing I want to say before I play this clip, because I have found it, is that his father says to him, I don't want you to go into the bunker, because if you are missing from school, it will create panic amongst your schoolmates and their families and society, because he's a very prominent figure, in the late 60s, I think at this time. So the interesting thing he says to Bobby Kennedy whilst he's a young child, he says to him, it is better to me to be amongst the dead than amongst the living when it comes to a nuclear exchange. And that's a really intense thing to tell a kid. But these are the kinds of times that their minds were focused on, because it's a very real threat. We've kind of forgotten this in the modern age, and this is why I'm kind of bringing this topic up a little bit. So I want you to pay attention to that. But the other thing is how he talks about this city underground. And this is continuation of government and NORAD. And we'll get back to the Santa thing in just a moment. But just before I forget, let's see if I can call this up for you. And let me make sure you can hear it. Shirby. And then let's bring it up on screen for you. Stuff.
Your memories of it. What are some interesting kind of?
In the middle of, I was going to school in Washington D.C. to Sidwell or to
So basically, blah blah blah. He was going to school.
D.C. White House. He wasn't coming home.
Now this is the point where he's saying, my brother and I were at home, but my dad wasn't. He called us, and he
was staying with the XCOM committee and sleeping there, and they were up, 24 hours a day. They were debating and trying to figure out what was happening. And but we had U.S. Marshals come to our house to take us down.
Apologies, I said it was National Guard. It was U.S. Marshals. I'm not too sure if that's the same thing or not. My apologies. Apologies for my ignorance.
We're going to take us down to White Sulphur Springs in Southern Virginia, in the Blue Ridge Mountains, where there was an underground city, essentially a bunker that was like a city, and apparently it had McDonald's in it and a lot of other, it was a full city for the U.S. government and their families.
So it was a full city for the U.S. government and their families. Not your family, not my family, their family. And this is something that we brought up in previous story time, the breakaways. When you're dealing with people that can, at the snap of a real or false emergency, suspend constitutions, and then the military comes and just takes government, and then through the fear of like, well, it's about to be the end of the world, and don't worry, the military will save you. There's all these secret accords and all these unconstitutional things going on. So this is why when I was saying earlier, it's just mind-bending that this is the entity, Northcom, that tracks Santa Claus for the kids, to let them know when Santa's coming. It's just mind-blowing, because there's also a link here between Santa Claus and the UAP file. But I want to just finish a little bit with RFK, because I can't remember exactly all the things he said here. Let's just go a little bit further, and I'll tell you about Santa Claus a bit more.
U.S. Marshals came to our house to take us down there, and I was very excited about doing that. And this was at a time, when we were doing the drills, we were doing the duck and cover drills once a week at our school.
For those of you that do not know what a duck and cover drill is, basically, they were teaching the young children how to save themselves from nuclear annihilation by snuggling under the desks. Like, that's going to help.
Where they would tell you when the alarms go off, then you put your head under the table, you remove the sharps from your desk, put them inside your desk, you put your head under the table, and you wait, and the initial blast will take the windows out of the school, and then we all stand up and file in an orderly fashion.
So I wonder, which blast are they referring to? Is it the superheated high pressure wind, let's call it, air? Is it the thermal blast that follows, the shock waves, which this was like complete, we talk about fake news and stuff these days, right, and misinformation, but people were a lot more trusting of their governments because they had a lot less access to wide information like we do today. They didn't have this instant Twitter, independent information. And so they were a little bit more trusting of the governments. That's why the assassination was such a heart-wrenching stab in the back for most Americans, even to this day. Let's listen a little bit further.
To the basement where we're going to be for the next 6 or 8 months or whatever. But in the basement where, we went occasionally in those corridors, were lined with freeze-dried food canisters up to the from floor to ceiling. So people were, we were all preparing for this, and it was, Bob McNamara, who was a friend of mine, and was my father, one of my father's close friends, as Secretary of Defense. He later called it mass psychosis. And my father deeply regretted participating in the bomb shelter program because he said it was part of a psychological psyop trick to teach Americans that nuclear war was acceptable.
Not only acceptable, but also to be in a state of constant fear. In the previous story time, we looked at the state of tension that the CIA created in Europe, and specifically in Italy through Operation Gladio. And we see that it's not above them at all to create absolute chaos just for the objective of fear. Because when people are in a state of fear, they are malleable. And that comes from the mind control program, which we'll get to in just a bit. But let's finish this in a sec.
That it was survivable. But my father, anyway, when the marshals came to our house to take me and my brother Joe away, and we were the ones who were home at that time, my father called and he talked to us on the phone and he said, I don't want you going down there because if you disappear from school, people are going to panic. And I need you to be a good soldier and go to school. And
how intense is that? How intense is that? Like he was like 12 or something? Imagine your dad telling you, be a good soldier, go to school. It's okay. Nuclear apocalypse, respect. Go down as a warrior. And you go down as a common person. We're not going to hide in a bunker. Even if we know that there's this huge chaos. Do you see the slight quality difference between, say, a Kennedy and I don't know if a Bush would do this or a Clinton would do this. That's just my opinion. You make of that what you will, but I'm not saying that this man is a saint. I'm not saying that this man is solve all problems for the future of humanity. But I just want to point that out. It's interesting that in his family, moral choices are more important than saving your own skin.
And he said something to me during that period, which was that if the nuclear war happened, it would be better to be among the dead than the living, which I did not believe. Okay, I mean, I had already prepared myself for the dystopian future, and I knew I could. I spent every day in the woods. I knew that I could survive by catching crawfish and, cooking mud puppies and do whatever I had to do. But I felt like, okay, I can handle this. And I really wanted to see the setup down in, this underground city.
I mean, this just blows me away. I mean, imagine your family being like, you know what? For the greater good, go face nuclear apocalypse. It's better to be amongst the dead than the living in this case. Because if you survive a nuclear apocalypse, what world do you live in at that point? Because we're not talking like Hiroshima. We're not talking like these stock footages of, just a nice mushroom cloud in the distance. When we're talking about mutually assured destruction, we said it last time, nowadays nukes have multiple MIRVs, multiple independent re-entry vehicles. 12 in one missile, and then you're firing like 100 missiles, and those each break in. I mean, you got like hundreds of nukes, maybe hundreds upon hundreds, maybe thousands. Who knows? America definitely does have that kind of arsenal, and so does Russia. And you only need a few hundred of these megaton upon megaton nukes to basically create a nuclear winter for, I don't know, 2, 3, 4 generations. It's no good. The radiation and the fallout will just, I mean, over and above just scorching the earth and creating just blackness for months, and then radiating the soil for thousands of years. I don't know. Yeah, it's. But this is what these people think about. And remember, we talked about the doomsday culture of these continuation of government people. And that's why they have also this esoteric thing about them. They think about the end of the world and Armageddon and providence and prophecy and the future of humanity in this way, in this long theatrical story. You know, whilst we are thinking year to year, or in 5 years' time, or 20 years' time, these mofos are thinking like, you know, how do we dominate the earth for the next 1,000 years? You know, as the Reichs tried to do. So there's just a little piece here at the end. I just want to...
But anyway, that was, you know, part of it for me. My father was away, and, you know, the last days of it, my father got this idea because Khrushchev had sent 2 letters. He sent one letter that was conciliatory, and then he sent a letter that after his Joint Chiefs and the warmongers around him saw that letter and they disapproved of it, they sent another letter that was extremely belligerent. And my father had the idea, let's just pretend we didn't get the second letter and reply to the first one.
So, I mean, that's a statesman for you. We've spoken about in a few episodes prior how Gorbachev really respected the Kennedys. He gave a very fascinating talk at the school book depository in Texas, where apparently the shot came from that killed Kennedy, because they had this close relationship. They had to bypass their intelligence services. And remember the red phone? That's the whole point. The whole point of the red phone was to bypass all these generals and all these intelligence operatives and shady globalist, you know, people to just talk directly so that they could avoid nuclear destruction and try and mend relationships between the two countries at the most highest of their at the highest moments of their tensions, which is kind of a real lesson we should take today, right? We got major conflicts in the world, especially in the Ukraine, and dialogue, negotiation. A lot of this could have gone a long way in saving countries and lives and territories and all these things. It's a really big, terrible shame. But this is where we are now. The point I just wanted to go back to here quickly is that one thing that Robert Kennedy here was also saying is that, you know, they had to, Gorbachev and Kennedy tried to even do a space program together. They wanted to do a lunar program together, and all of these things were torpedoed by the intelligence services around them. They just wanted perpetual war. You know, think of where that sounds familiar. You create a conflict and then you fund it, and then you basically you create the problem, and then, oh look, I'm the solution to the problem, and then you've basically created your own rolling economy there. A lot of how these warmongers work. So anyways, let's just go back. It's just, I mean, this is such a great interview. We'll definitely be coming back to it. But we were talking about, you know, Kennedy was saying there how when he was a child, even in the 70s, 60s, they were going to whisk him into a giant bunker. It was a city. That's what he says. It even had a McDonald's. And it was only for the government families. And they were going to get slipped out first. Not the plebs like you and me. No. The government elites. They go first, right? Now, that's continuation of government. That's NORAD. And that's why I say, when they have this business of like telling the little boys and girls when Santa's gonna fly across the world, it's all bunk. Because, you know, what are they actually tracking? You know, they say this business, oh no, Santa has a different perception of time. You know, one day to him is like a month. And so he goes very fast. And so we track him that way. Can I tell you why this is coming up? Because we are talking about how once upon a time conspiracy theories were called crazies, because during the Apollo missions, we were like, why do they keep talking about Santa? Why are they like, oh, Santa's here? Oh, mission control. Be advised, Santa is... Let's listen to that. I think I've got it, but the audio is quite terrible. Let me see here, because this whole story of Santa in the UFO file is the secret communications between the Apollo missions and the astronauts with ground control, and they sometimes use these back channels to be like, oh, well, there's Santa again, he's come to visit us, and it's nowhere close to December, So it's always been told in the back circles, in the UFO studies, that, the public have been doing basically most of the headwork, separating the tangle of lies. They've been like, well, this is a very interesting thing, because a lot of people tell us that that's their code word for UAPs when they spot them during ISS missions, or during the lunar landers. And remember, there's more than one astronaut that said, yeah, we were there, and there were others there as well watching. Let's see if I can pull up that video for you, because it's very interesting that good old NORAD has this desire to track Santa. And whilst I'm looking for that video, let's just pull this up here. This is Donna Hare. She has come up in our previous story times as well. She was one of the people that came forward through Stephen Greer's Disclosure Project back in 2001, just before 9/11. And she was saying that, her job at NASA was to airbrush things so that, the public got only what they needed to see and nothing that was classified. And one of her colleagues brought her across and said, oh, by the way, guess what? I have slightly higher clearance than you, and what do you make of these bases on the back of the moon? Or these, UAPs and UFOs and these kinds of things. And she kind of came forward as one of the people saying, and not the only one, but one of the people coming forward saying that they use the term Santa Claus as a code word for when these lights and orbs and phenomena would pop up. So let's see here. I think I do have this video for us. Okay, so I suppose this would be under NASA, I suppose. All right, so this is Donna Hare. We'll just watch this in a moment. This is from the Disclosure Project. I'm just going to put this in the background whilst I'm looking for the actual... All right, let me just pull it up straight from YouTube. So anyway, this is Donna Hare talking about her experiences and such like that, thanks to Dr. Stephen Greer. Now, let me just pull this up straight from YouTube. Because, it's quite a famous piece here, and I'm sure someone in the comments is going to point me. There we go. Alright, let's make sure that we can see this as well. So this is the Apollo 8 mission, where one of the astronauts basically says, Houston, I just want to let you know Santa Claus is real. I think I'm just going to jump just a little forward.
Apollo 8, over. Hello, Apollo 8. Loud and clear. Roger. Please be informed there is a Santa Claus. That's affirmative. You're the best ones to know.
Now, what's really interesting about that is that it was nowhere near Christmas, so the context, it's interesting. Look into it. Very fascinating. It's not the only case. And the reason that I'm bringing this up, this whole Santa Claus continuation of government thing, is because just a few years ago, if you started talking about this stuff, you were crazy. You were just marked as little fringe, run off and go be on 4chan kind of person, go put tinfoil on your head. And now we're seeing through all of this disclosure that these kinds of things are becoming truer by the day. So that was my main point there. And as I said, these claims of UAPs going back 100 years plus, 1,000 years plus, it's not new to us. And that's why I say a lot of what we're seeing is quite PSY-OPS, you know. And there is a grain of truth in some of it. And even if that 1% is true, that has really large implications for us personally and for our families and our communities, just like the whole of human civilization. If there is or isn't life on other planets, that means something to us. If there are technologies that could get us off fossil fuels and stop the monopoly of people who have interest in creating wars to continue the desire for oil by suppressing these kinds of technologies like 0 point whatever stuff, or I don't know, you know, stellarators or whatever clean futuristic energy platforms that we have in mind for the human race. If any one of these things is even remotely true, and you know, we need to be ready for this kind of thing. That's why we keep talking about grounding. Your mind is important, your being is important, your soul is important. And that is why the government is after it. All of it. Your mind, body, and soul. And if you don't believe me, we'll jump into that. Because, ladies and gentlemen, we've kind of hit the 1 hour mark of StoryTime 17. And we've spent the first hour really digging our heels deep into this ground to stand firm as we plow through the misinformation and the rapids of disclosure and political corruption. And as I said, we're seeing a lot of unrest in a lot of countries. And I wanted to say that a lot of this is based on PSY-OPS, and our minds need to be very, very clear about those dangers. And that's specifically why we went on that torrent about like how your consciousness is a thing that this universe will miss if it was not here. Consciousness is important. The universe might even be itself, consciousness witnessing itself. And that's why that important relationship, I just want to put that as a basis, because when we talk about things like mystery schools or the occult or these breakaway continuation of government people, or even Jack Parsons at JPL, the propulsion laboratories of NASA, or the Thule Society, or I mean, I'm just throwing a huge bucket of these mystical, occult, secret organizations. They all kind of have this overlapping knowledge that they keep hidden. It's not just for missiles and nukes and secret technologies against your enemies. They also seem to hide archaeological digs. They also seem to hide anything that doesn't fit narratives. A few story times ago, we talked about one of the founders of the Cosmos Club, good old Powell, with his one arm missing from the Civil War, and how he did one of the first government-sanctioned, federal-sanctioned trips down the Colorado, down the Grand Canyon, and to find and explore and all these things. And he was the one that, you know, made Isis Temple and Horus Temple and Shiva, and he named these places in the Grand Canyon in these weird ways. And we started seeing these reports of Egyptian artifacts in the Grand Canyon, and then suddenly no one can go there. And this man was also deep in the occult. I mean, he was helping the Paiute Indians come up with a ghost dance and involving himself in their metaphysics and their spirituality. Because spirituality and this kind of mental open-mindedness but grounding is important. And that's what's going to lead us straight into the second half things are about to get rough. That's why we needed grounding first. Because in the second half of StoryTime 17, when we talk about awakening, we have to understand, what are we awakening from? I've given you an example of how truth is coming thick and fast, and what was once conspiracy theory is now like, oh, Santa Claus, Apollo 11, that was all ha ha ha. But now we're getting, even people like Von Herk and Gillot speaking about, Rudolph's red nose and tracking Santa, and it's not conspiracy stuff anymore as much, especially now with all this UAP tracking stuff that's coming through the congressional hearings, and the Congress demanding that these aerospace agencies bring forward materials and technologies. I don't see that happening. But, it's on. It's on like Donkey Kong, people. And so that's why I say grounding, spiritual grounding. Mystery schools knew this. If we didn't have grounding, we would lose ourselves, and so too our race, our human race. Just will fade into the obscurity of history. Self-destruct, as many have studied. And if you're interested in this topic, I do highly recommend Daniel Schmachtenberger. The surname is a bit of a Schmachtenberger. It's quite long once you spell it out, but he talks about really clear thinking ways how we can avoid human destruction, and ways to create systems that are anti-fragile and equitable, in ways that have the correct association with the value of nature and human progress. So in other words, making sure that a whale is more valuable in the ocean than on a boat, being sold off in a market for a tenth of its price. And so that's, what encourages us to depopulate fish and forests and all these things. So Schmachtenberger is an excellent person if you want to push against that destructive direction that we're kind of going in. But that destructive direction, let's talk about it for a little bit. Now, as we jump into StoryTime 17's second half, as I mentioned, we are going to be talking about mind control, because you've seen with a lot of these things, there's been a narrative control to make sure that anytime you're close to a truth, you're discredited and pushed aside, and if you get a little too close, you get pushed out of a window. We'll see that in just a moment. Many people have been defenestrated by the CIA, unfortunately. So it's important now, as we dive into the world of mind control, because this is around the same time of the 1960s and 70s, and this time that Kennedy was talking about. Kennedy Jr., that is, Bobby Kennedy, as he likes to be called. And the CIA at this point assassinated Kennedy, his uncle. And they are running rampant. They are literally funding their own affairs. They have their own air force. They have their own army. They've got their own... They're doing their own operations. Stuff that the president doesn't even know about. I mean, that's why when Bobby Kennedy's uncle JFK finds out that the Bay of Pigs is happening, that they're invading Cuba with these secret clandestine people trying to overthrow, he's just like, what are you guys doing? Who authorized this? That's why you wanted to tear them up into 1,000 pieces and scatter them to the wind. The CIA was just running rampant. And one of the things that they were running rampant with was they had absolutely no regard for constitutionality. None. Zero. They were at this time... I mean, we're going to have a look at it. They're basically... The aspect we're going to... just... Let's not even get into the gun smuggling and the drug running and the trafficking and all the other things that have also been on record. I'm just going to focus this time around, because of this timeline that we're kind of dealing with at the moment, specifically about the CIA's projects, Blue Book, Artichoke, and then MK Ultra. Because I said Blue Book, I mean BlueBird. You mix these up sometimes. Because these are very well documented. And remember, some of these documents they illegally tried to burn and get rid of. And finally, some of them actually came to the light of day. And people pushed against them at the time when journalism wasn't completely as captured by these operations like Mockingbird and others, by these intelligence agencies. So this is what we're looking at now in the second half. CIA mind control. Man, it freaks me out, you know, because this is what we're subjected to every day, every hour of every day. If you're touching social media, if you've got an electronic device on you, you're a part of this battle. And yeah, let's jump into a few things, shall we? Let's jump into a few things. So, first and foremost, we need to get our minds around, what do we mean by mind control? What is this business? Hold your horses. Let's just, you know, explain that to me like I'm 5. Okay, let me put it to you as simply as I can. Basically, the CIA then, and probably still now, is doing completely illegal things that if you only knew about, would probably bring you sick to your stomach. And they're doing it in your name, for your safety. And every time not every time, but most of the times we check, they're the people causing the problems that then they're trying to solve. So here, for example, to show you how nefarious these mofos are. Here is a document. There was, you know, now is in the archives, but you can get through Freedom of Information. It's called Study of Assassination. And this is how the CIA manual back in the 1950s, 1960s was, you know, how to bump a person off and cover your tracks. What kind of a person is needed to do this kind of a job, you know? There's about the assassin, you know? Planning, you know, how to do all the sit rep and all the intelligence for that and execution of it, the techniques, you know? Now, what I want to point out about techniques here, read that top line. Let me blow that up for you guys that are maybe reading this on a small thing here. The simplest local tools are often more efficient. So a hammer, axe, wrench, screwdriver, fire poker, kitchen knife, lamp stand, anything hard, heavy, and handy will suffice. Length of rope, wire, or a belt will do if the assassin is strong and agile. I mean, do you see what this guy's going on about here? Now, what they say then is, it may be desirable to improvise and implement whatever you can at the scene, but the best is to avoid the disclosure of identity. So the best thing to do is to make it look like an accident. Now, the most efficient accident in simple assassination, this is 1958, is a fall from 75 feet or more onto a hard surface. Does anyone remember James Forrestal? Does anyone remember... I mean, here we're going to look at the one person that we discovered MK Ultra through. His family, you know, they told him, he threw himself out of the window. And then when the family wanted to, you know, eventually the mother died and they wanted to put the dad and the mom together and they exhumed the body, they said, you know what, just let's get another autopsy on good old dad that was also, you know, said something about being part of this mind control CIA thing back in the day. I don't know, you know, let's also do a little autopsy just in case. And then they find, oh, well, actually dad, although he landed on his back, there's no glass, there's no cuts, he's got a blunt force trauma on his eye. So the coroner then says, well, this man wasn't pushed or thrown out of he didn't throw himself out through a window, he was damaged before. Anyways, now that case eventually becomes the trail that leads to MK Ultra, and MK Ultra also comes up in the Church Commission when we look at the Kennedy assassination. Remember the heart attack gun and things like this is the CIA, this is the intelligence government and the breakaway do whatever you want illegal people. Let's look at some videos about these guys, right? So back in the old days, as I mentioned, the media was a little less connected via internet and less on top of the government gravy train. And so there was a little bit more independent journalism, and so there was journalists and people did interviews a lot more often, even when nowadays they can just say no comment and then speak to my lawyers, and then you never actually get a response. Back then, even if people were shifty, it was interesting. You could always get a sense of them, right? And so this is a program that ABC ran many, many years ago, talking about mind control. And I want to play this one clip here because we're looking at how the CIA not only will assassinate and do these other nefarious things, but they will take American citizens, their own citizens, and do the most crazy experiments on them without their knowledge. Even in this case here, we're talking about the guy that flew out the window. He was one of them. He was one of the MK Ultra scientists, one of the psychiatrists that was conducting these experiments, and he himself got I guess spiked is the right word. So firstly, let's just frame all of this, okay, because I want to make sure that this is clear. What we're talking about in the second half of Storytime is basically mind control and how the CIA is running rampant. They are assassinating people and throwing people out of windows. It's a mess. They're coupping governments left, right, and center. And one of the secret things they're trying to do are these mind programs. Now, I'm not even going to get into technical remote viewing and all of the occult and more parapsychological stuff that they were doing through TARG and others at the SRI and other universities and institutions. If you've ever seen the movie Men Who Stare at Goats and things like that, it's a trip. It's like a whole story time on its own. This section here, I'm just going to focus on the straight mind control through hypnosis, drugs, trauma, terror, fear, the good old-fashioned kind that the CIA likes to use, I'm not even going to get into that parapsychological stuff just yet, but there is a link there, it's the same kind of mix. And, this was also mentioned on the Lex Friedman, hold on, before we jump into the CIA stuff, I think I did bookmark this. Yeah, so RFK Jr. in the Lex Friedman podcast also speaks about how the CIA assassinated his uncle and maybe even his father. He doesn't say that in that specific, the part about his father. He doesn't specifically say that in this interview with Lex, but I've heard him say it before. But that's the kind of assassination stuff we're talking about at the time. You know what? Let's. I need to bookmark a few things there, so we'll get back into those little clips from the Lex Friedman podcast. I want to give you some commentary on that. But back to mind control, because that's the real theme here. And I'm going to play some old video because, trying to put this in its frame, you must remember that what they are trying to do with mind control is basically have a weapon that they can reliably use to do whatever it is that their objective is. So whether it's to assassinate or to perform some other action, mundane or otherwise, deliver this or pick up a phone here or drive a person there and then, forget. These are the kinds of things that they would love to have. And that's why Neuralink would be an interesting playground for these intelligence authorities if that was linked to our memory. Imagine that. Have a bad thought and the government encrypts that memory until you can get authorization. But in the time of mind control, when they're starting this, one of the things that they're trying to do to understand the mind is a bit like they do with a particle accelerator. They just smash it up and just see what pours out, because that's all they know how to do. To hammer everything's a nail. And that's really where it becomes shocking, that they would take humans and take their minds and their lives and destroy them to the point just to see what happens, just to see if, like, will this work? Can it work? I don't know. One of the tools that they started using were hallucinogenic drugs. Now, the first thing that they started with, other than scopolamine and stuff, because they were looking for a truth drug, a serum that would bring interrogation protocol to a new level, where they could just inject a person and then the person would just, yes, here's all my secrets from this adversarial government of mine. That was their hope. A truth drug. But it also, whatever effects could be useful, crowd suppression, memory erasing, whatever the case is, they were like, we could maybe make that work in times of war, which is, for the CIA, always. They don't need any kind of authorization to feel like they need to perform an op. So here's a little clip about the truth drug from this ABC article, from this documentary called Mind Control. And let's pull that up. Let's make sure you can hear it, though, shall we?
Level regarding TD. TD was a rather transparent cover for Truth Drug. George White worked with the Truth Drug Committee here at St. Elizabeth's Hospital in the nation's capital. They experimented with mescaline, scopolamine, and marijuana on unwitting victims. The committee soon...
So I just want to mention scopolamine, marijuana. Notice that they haven't yet mentioned LSD, because this is a little bit before, and psilocybin was the other one, which is the compound from magic mushrooms. We'll look at that in just a moment. But you can see that they're already using advanced interrogation techniques, because scopolamine, for example, is something that makes your heart beats. They used to use it for arrhythmia. In other words, people with irregular heartbeats, it was to try and help the heart beat regularly. But it's also dissociative. You can find scopolamine from very basic plants, like a brugmansia flower. You touch that and then touch your eyes, it's going to burn, and these kinds of things. And people make a tea and think, oh yeah, I'm going to have a great little trip, and instead they end up in prison because they lose track of where they are and what's happening, and they basically have like a little moment of dementia, and that never goes well. They either end up in hospital or in a prison. But the CIA loved that stuff, because in that dissociative state, that's where they could try and inject ideas or pull out truths, So, as I said, this is just before the time of LSD. We'll look at that in just a moment.
Learned there was no easy panacea, no truth drug at this stage. But White and later colleagues would not stop trying. The goal remained the same. As this 1952 CIA memo says, the aim is controlling an individual to the point where he will do our bidding against his will, and even against such fundamental laws of nature as self-preservation.
Even against the fundamental laws of self-preservation. So, in a weird kind of way, the ultimate thing was they were basically looking for a Manchurian candidate. Okay? They were trying to find a kind of mind control that allowed people... Zoolander. We've been through this before. Zoolander, when he heard that song, relax, don't do it, he became an assassin and wanted to, perform some kind of assassination. That's a Manchurian candidate. He had no recollection of having that trigger in his mind. And the way they do that is by breaking down... There's basically 3 steps, but the 2 that are most damaging is, I believe it was depatterning. Depatterning, where basically they just shock your brain until you have no memory of what it means to even be a human. And in psychic driving, that was also just like bombarding you with drugs and abuse and fear and everything to just try and drive the psyche deeper and deeper into tabula rasa, a blank slate. Terrible. So, this is it. They're trying to find the truth drug. So the first thing they try with, or try get to, is basically psilocybin, as was mentioned there, right? Let's see here. From psilocybin, they also wanted to get into LSD. So let's first look at psilocybin side of things, shall we?
This man, Dr.
Now, remember, we're dealing with MK Ultra here, so when you hear the word Gottlieb, just keep that in mind, shall we?
This man, Dr. Sidney Gottlieb, a chemist. Dr. Gottlieb declined ABC News' request for an interview. In their never-ending search for the miracle weapon, CIA operatives searched here in the remote mountain areas of southern Mexico for what up to then had been considered a myth, magic mushrooms. They used this man, a part-time chemist for the CIA, to dupe this man, a vice president of a bank and an amateur mycologist or mushroom expert, to try to get to the magic mushrooms and turn them into a drug.
So what's really funny is one of those things is not mushrooms, it's a fertility statue, it's a penis head. Moving along, the rest is all mushrooms.
But it would be the amateur, R. Gordon Wasson.
So let me just frame this. The CIA, okay, gets this dude, who is apparently a pharmacist, to get this dude to basically set up an op to go get magic mushrooms for this whole academic study that's all just a farce, so that they can bring the compounds back to the CIA and make nefarious drugs so that they can control people. That's what's going on here.
This man, a vice president of a bank and an amateur mycologist or mushroom expert, to try to get to the magic mushrooms and turn them into a drug. But it would be the amateur, R. Gordon Wasson and his colleagues, who would win the race and develop the drug psilocybin from the magic mushrooms.
We went into the Mazatec area, far from the highways, remote from Mexico City. There we found that rotten bagasse, as it's called, bagasso, covered with mushrooms. These mushrooms I didn't know.
Bagasso would basically be a pile of compost, something composting like leaves or plant matter, stuff like that, or even animal matter. Fungi don't care. Compost is compost.
Oh, had never seen. They were the sacred mushrooms.
Wasson would also discover and record the ancient mystical rites of the mushrooms from a local shaman or magical priestess, Maria Sabina.
Now, Maria Sabina is super famous. She would be famous for explaining in her cultural storytelling that these visions that the shamans are having are not hallucinations. They are real places, real experiences, real entities. They are a passage to another part of existence that we have access to, but that the shamanic teachings help us reach with these medicinal plants.
And we were seeing incredible sights. They would go slowly or they would go fast as I ordained. All your senses are rendered acute. We say that you see visions, you see hallucinations, but that doesn't begin to tell this story. The hallucinations are only part of it. You hear sounds, you smell things. The night was thrilling.
So now, that's great. He's with a shaman, he's tripping on mushrooms, life is great, he's just like in some village, and he's got some real shamanic guidance. I almost want to swear at this point, because here he is enjoying this great sacred knowledge and experience from this shamanic woman who's teaching him the deep knowledge of her people, only for them to lie to them, for the compound of the magic mushroom to be taken into a laboratory and weaponized against people. And the people that will be dosed with psilocybin, some of them die because they get like 6 doses intravenously straight into the blood. like a gazillion times more dose than you would have. I mean, I'm exaggerating here, but there have been deaths because they do not do this in the same kind of setting that they have the privilege of having here. They force people into these traumatic states under these incredible psychological strains. They abuse these substances worse than a drug addict does, to throw people into those kinds of states. If you've ever seen the movie The Jacket, some of this might be familiar, these topics and themes. Let's move a little bit more forward.
Word of Wasson's discovery...
Oh, wait, so hold on. Wait. So then, of course, this is the psilocybin, right? Because what they then go crazy about, that is the CIA and all the intelligence agencies, is then they find Hoffman's LSD. Now, for those of you that don't know, Albert Hoffman, basically a Swiss chemist, discovers the synthetic compound LSD. And this is known as Bicycle Day, the day that he touches it and begins tripping balls and decides to go on his bicycle for a very long bicycle ride through the village, tripping, the first human being to trip on this lysergic acid dithylamine or something like that, LSD. So again, it's fine when you have the right set and setting and you do it out of your own volition. But when the CIA basically discovers the LSD, they're like, oh, you mean we can put like a bucket of this in the water supply and get a whole city tripping balls and completely dysfunctional? Well, that would be interesting, either for our enemies or if we wanted to invent something here. The CIA, how they are. So this is just, I want to try and get you into the mindset of these people where they think that the laws do not apply to them. At this point here, they've basically assassinated a president, no one said anything, so they're like, we'll just break down the minds of our own civilian population. And this is the kind of person in this documentary. I just spotted him here, and I want to show you the kinds of people that are involved in this kind of thing. Now, here, what you saw the dudes doing mushrooms, they were patsies. They were being guided by the CIA to basically go get the compounds. But let's look at the actual intelligence schmucks, shall we? So here's the first one talking about
at the
humane, about how these procedures are like a humane way of warfare. I don't know so much, because also if you read his body language, he's loving. He's just like, what laws? What minds? It's like, it's just people. It's just warfare, Luckily, we're not shooting them. So let's have a listen, shall we?
Work done at the Tulane Medical Center in New Orleans involved several drugs, hallucinogenics, and electrodes implanted in the brain. The chief researcher was Dr. Russell Monroe, now head of the psychiatry department at the University of Maryland. These are various progress reports written by Dr. Monroe and recently obtained by ABC News. From one of the progress reports, a report of a woman who had electrodes implanted in the brain and was then given LSD and other drugs.
By the way, that woman is in this documentary. Like, they actually... That's why I say these were different times. The interviewer in this documentary basically interviews not only the guy who, after they discover that the CIA did these terrible things and it now becomes public knowledge, he not only interviews the guy that did these things, but then the victim, and it's like, oh, by the way, this is the CIA's response about what they did to you. What do you think about that? It's mind-bending. I mean, your heart breaks for these people because they're, we're talking about like real people, and they're just like, yeah, no, they threw my dad out of a window. What the? Are you kidding? Like, I can't think about how I would even respond to that. They have very visceral realizations in almost real time. It's very sad and eye-opening at the same time. I just wanted to make that point.
She became agitated, cried, lapsed into a trance-like state. Felt as if she were about to have a convulsion, experienced waves of darkness and light.
Now, of course, she's closed in a lab, probably strapped to a chair, being induced with these things that she has no idea what they are. You know, they tell her, we're giving you medicine, and then like she doesn't know what the medicine is, and they tell her, oh look, it might make you feel a little bit worse, and then your mind just begins to break down because that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to overdose you to a point where your persona begins to dissolve.
Had bizarre sensations in her neck and legs. Said somebody was trying to manipulate her body. At this point, Dr. Monroe wrote that the woman was obviously having paranoid ideas. As a layperson, perhaps you can enlighten me. What therapeutic effect would the type of experiment that I just described have on a patient?
So he's asking very slightly that, like, why would you be doing this? You know, because there's the Hippocratic Oath, first do no harm. The CIA is not supposed to be doing experiments that break down the minds of people, causing permanent damage, especially when they're your citizens. Like, highly illegal. So he's asking a really big question with a very smooth, gentle question. Like a gentle push from that question.
Well, the therapeutic effect would be indirect.
Was this patient aware?
Indirect meaning there is no therapeutic effect. There's nothing direct about it. No therapy.
That she was being given LSD.
Yes, I mean they were told that they would be given some medication.
The question was, did she know she was being given LSD? His reply is like, yes. Well, no, they were being told they were given medication.
And they
specifically LSD?
Well, we told them, I don't think that they would have even known what LSD was.
Yeah, they wouldn't even know what LSD was because it's only the 60s and 70s during the Cultural Revolution, and hallucinogenics are just everywhere.
Then at the time, they were told that they would be given some medications which might make them feel worse.
Dr. Monroe, what do you think the Army Chemical Corps was looking for in all of this testing?
They were looking for an incapacitating agent.
Look at that little smile, and now he's got a cigarette out. Now he's feeling comfortable. You know, they probably just cut the scene, and he's just like, look, don't make me look bad. I'm not going to follow this line of questioning anymore. Next question, please. And now they're having a bit more of a relaxed conversation. Now, look how smug he is. He's talking about destroying the mind and lives of people. Look at the smug face.
An agent that would not harm the person
let me rewind that.
An agent for incapacity.
Dr. Monroe, what do you think the Army Chemical Corps was looking for in all of this testing?
They were looking for an incapacitating agent. An agent that would not harm the person permanently, but would incapacitate them temporarily. That seemed like a humanistic way to wage a war.
No, that is some evil bullshit right there. Let me just say that. I mean, what he basically said was, the ends justifies the means. When people say that, the piles of dead bodies is usually very high, historically speaking. And the smugness upon which he's basically saying to this lawyer, we are breaking the law, or broke, because now the interviewer, I'm sorry, I called him a lawyer, but the interviewer came to him and said, you know, this is the report that's basically come out showing the CIA did these terrible things, like, why are you doing this? He's like, well, it's an incapacitant, you know, it's a good, humane way to wage war, you know, we had to figure out how to destroy the minds of our own people so that, just in case we had to interrogate someone from far away, you know? And just the smugness about it. It's disturbing. So, one of the victims of that man and many others was, of course, good old Frank Olson. And I'm withheld his story a little bit earlier, because now it makes a little bit more sense when you see the kind of evil organization that the CIA is at this point and the kind of people driving it. I mean, let's take a look at this before we look at how Frank, because the story of Frank Olson is basically this. He is involved in these projects, and he is clinical in his administration of these substances to people. They're trying to get information. For him, he's a scientist, you know. And one day he meets up with these people, and they drug him, his own colleagues, who he's done all these experiments to these other people. Now he's become the experiment against his will. And he's the one that eventually gets defenestrated, and his family does the autopsy and finds out that, well, he flew through a window. Where's all the glass? Why does he have a blunt force trauma? Why, you know, what's going on here? So let's look at another one of the people who are responsible for this man's demise, to really square this, shall we?
University of Delaware chemist secretly served the CIA preparing deadly chemicals on short notice.
And again, I want you to just listen to his misconstruing of the question and reluctance to kind of say the answer, what the interviewer is asking.
Moore was instructed to get close to Wasson and accompany him on another trip to Mexico to get the magic mushrooms. Internal documents show the CIA felt a drug derived from the mushrooms could remain an agency secret.
What in the world were they looking for with the magic mushrooms?
I think the best answer to that is that they were looking for fundamental information on compounds that would be capable of causing changes in behavior, changes in mental attitude.
Did you ever...
How thick are those eyebrows?
...consider what would have happened if any of these substances were given to, say, unwitting people?
Now notice he's confused by this question.
Oh, I don't remember having considered that specifically.
Because in his mind, he's like, what do you mean unwitting people? Do you mean like someone falls into a vat of LSD? Like, what are you talking about here? Like,
what if you... I trust perhaps you've thought about it.
Well, I haven't worried about it. Your question again, what would I have thought had I known that...
What had I known? Come again.
Any of these substances would
have been given to
unwitting persons.
You mean a hostile agent of another government?
No, I mean
that was probably one of the things they had in mind.
I mean testing it out on an American citizen.
Oh, now he understands. Now he understands the question. Now he needs an answer for the question. I shake my head. I lick my lips. I give a little smile. I look to the right.
I guess I must seem very, very cold-blooded about this, but...
Yes, very reptilian.
But I don't recall ever having been very much preoccupied with that issue.
So... You know, they were really not preoccupied if these substances were being given to people unwittingly. And as I said, one of the people who was involved in this became one of the subjects. Good old Frank Olson. Now, Frank Olson was given an incredibly high dosage of LSD, and he became very depressed. He tried to resign, and they didn't let him. They kind of talked him into staying because they didn't want the secret to come out that, you know, they had dosed him against his will. And then he was visited, and then he ended up flying out of a window. So that is good old Frank Olson. You know, and this person that was running all these projects, I mean, it's obviously not just one person. Because you'll see when we talk later, when I show you some of the clips from RFK, he talks about George Joannides, who was head of psychological operations during the 60s and onwards, and, you know, planned, according to JFK Jr., the whole assassination thing. And he's still alive today. He could be put under oath and told. He got the highest awards and commendations from the CIA, and we need to know what for. And so there still is one person alive that can maybe give us some disclosure about the whole thing. And we only found out about this person recently. The Warren Commission didn't even know this name. But prior to Joannides was Gottlieb and all these others that were also, again, doing all these crazy experiments back in World War II time. So these are some of the things that they were working on in terms of mind control. Like, because as I said, Olson, through the Freedom of Information and the cover-up, is where they begin to discover MK Ultra. And then they discover, oh, well, actually, this comes from a much older set of programs, you know? So the first one, as you know, I love policy documents. So this is the one that you can get straight from the CIA here. And this is about Project BlueBird. Okay, so this is the stuff that they I don't want to say very recently, but, you know, it's from the 1950s. So, I mean, only like 50 years later that they declassified this stuff. And this was back in the days when the CIA had just formed. And, oh, look, over there, one of the supplies they need is drugs. You know, it's part of the medical supplies for their op. Very funny. So anyway, these are some of the confidential documents. Did I bring that up on screen for you? Yes. That started with Project BlueBird. Not to be confused with Project Blue Book that we've looked at before. Project Blue Book being the study of MJ-12 alien intelligence gathered by these different organizations, the Navy, the Army, NSA, CIA, FBI, all of them. Okay, that's Blue Book. This is BlueBird. Now, the concept of a bluebird, some people call it a mockingjay, because it's one of the birds that can mimic almost any sound. It can apparently, like, mimic to the T a wide variety of sounds, not just voices. And so it was a good code name for this kind of mimicry of trying to control people and make them do all kinds of weird things, you know. Make them hear voices in their heads and all kinds of stuff. And so, you know, here, for example, they say, here's a list of problems that they have finding a full-time psychiatrist to be involved in this operation. So they just get like these, you know, these amateur patsies to get involved in these ops that are, as I said, illegal half the time. And, you know, reputable civilian psychiatrists could not afford to be available on short notice. We couldn't compare to their private income. They would be obligated to keep with patients, scheduled short notice. But then they go on and say, well, as a medical officer, they'd have to hide information, and you know, they'd have to be well compensated so that they keep our secrets and not worry about their Hippocratic oath. And, you know, so basically we're just going to do it ourselves. And not only did they do this kind of stuff, but I mean, if you look at Operation Midnight Climax, I mean, they were trafficking women and creating brothels and prostitution rings so that they could get dirt on people and blackmail them for whatever other ends that, you know, the CIA might dream up. So this was a crazy time, because BlueBird eventually became Project Artichoke, if I'm not mistaken. Let's actually call that up, shall we? So, there we go. Project Artichoke was a project developed and enacted by the United States Central Intelligence Agency for the purpose of researching methods of interrogation. Interrogation here to be read as mind control. Initially known as Project BlueBird, Project Artichoke officially arose in 1951 and was operated by the CIA's Office for Scientific Intelligence. Yes, it's a very scientific thing in it. The primary goal of Project Artichoke was to determine whether a person could be involuntarily made to perform an act of attempted assassination. The project also studied the effects of hypnosis, forced addiction, and subsequent withdrawal from morphine and other chemicals, including LSD, to promote amnesia and other vulnerable states in subjects. Now, many say that in Hollywood and other elite places, there are these programming things, the sex kitten programming, and all these things that they break people down. Like people point to Britney Spears as a very as an example of someone that's been under psychological deconstruction into some other modeled person that they might not naturally be. And that might be a deep rabbit hole for some, but again, whether you're just looking at it at a very superficial level, as just like very low-key kind of psychological trauma that you give, even like bad parenting is a kind of psychological trauma, but this goes a step deeper. This is studying that trauma to try and weaponize it, and so they have no scruples about just destroying the mind. And that was Project Artichoke, that then became MK Ultra. And this was an illegal human experimentation program designed and undertaken by, again, the CIA, yours truly, intended to develop procedures and identify drugs that could be used during interrogations, again, read mind control, to weaken people and force confessions through brainwashing and psychological torture. Now, psychological torture means everything, anything. If they want to give you an overdose of drugs, if they want to rape you, if they want to beat you into unconscious states of coma, if they want to give you sleep deprivation or feed you other medicine, they'll do it. There was no scruples at this point. It was unrestricted moral madness by these intelligence agencies. And, we're looking at the 50s and 60s, but I'm mentioning all of this because that was then. Imagine what we're undergoing now with the advent of the internet and fifth generation information warfare. The kinds of stuff that they were doing then and had absolutely no scruples about doing now. Imagine the kind of ops that are going on today. 9/11 and COVID and all these things are still with very big questions to be answered. And the only ones that claim to have the truth are the very people that we say, are involved in the emergency to begin with. This is the whole conspiracy of it, right? Now, BlueBird, Artichoke, MK Ultra, these are very illegal things that the government has done to its own people, that the central intelligence agencies have actually done, because sometimes even politicians weren't aware of this. They had hearings to be like, oh my God, how is this even possible? And then they have committees, and then they try and reform the CIA, and then in a few years' time we discover they're doing other shady shit as well. In fact, let's listen to JFK here, because he talks about the CIA in his chat with Lex. We'll start to wrap up here. We're picking the CIA here, but just remember that this goes much, much deeper. So I want to just grab this little section here from the recent podcast that Bobby Kennedy did with JFK Jr. did with Lex Fridman, and this is about the assassination of his uncle by the CIA. So let's pull that up for you. Let's make sure we're not blasting your eardrums.
The strength and integrity to resist the what did you call them, the salad brass and institutions like the CIA. So that makes it particularly tragic that he was killed. To what degree was CIA involved, or the various bureaucracy involved in his death?
The evidence that the CIA was involved in my uncle's murder, and that they were subsequently involved in the cover-up, and continue to be involved in the cover-up. I mean, there's still 5,000 documents that they won't release, 60 years later.
And that's true, and that's against the law. I mean, already in 2017, they were ordered to release all the files, and then they were like, oh, but this, oh, but that. Trump was convinced at the last moment to keep some redacted. Biden didn't want to release them because, oh, it was COVID. You know, and when he says 5,000 documents, it sounds like, oh, well, it's only 5,000 pages. They've released, you know, thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of pages. What's 5,000 documents? But that's the trick. When they say documents, documents can be up to like 50,000 pages. A document is a whole bunch of pages relating to a certain thing. So when he says 5,000 documents, we are talking, you know, maybe a small percentage of the total page numbers, but it's still a huge amount of pages. And this is where the cream is. This is where, as I said, what was recently released led us to the psychological operator Joanides, who is one of the instigators of these kinds of psychological programs, which again, mind control. Let's listen a little bit further.
Is, I think, so insurmountable and so, you know, mountainous and overwhelming that it's beyond any reasonable doubt, including, you know, dozens of confessions of people who were involved in the assassination, but, you know, every kind of document and you know, I mean, it came as a surprise recently to most Americans, I think, the release of these documents in which the press, the American media, finally acknowledged that, yeah, Lee Harvey Oswald was a CIA asset.
That was also the other thing that came out recently, that Oswald was involved with Bannister, and, you know, he was part of the Air Force cadets since he was 19. He spent actually probably more of his life involved in the military than, like, you know, anything else. Perhaps an exaggeration, but a large part of his life. You know, he was only like 20-something when the whole assassination thing went down, and he was offed as well. So it's interesting. That was the other thing we discovered from these documents, and there's a few comments I want to make here, but let me hold them for the end here.
He was recruited, you know, in 1957. He was a Marine working at the Artichoke Air Force Base, which was the CIA Air Force Base, in, you know, with the U-2 flights, which was a CIA program, and that he was recruited by James Jesus Angleton, who was the director of counterintelligence, and then sent on a fake defection to Russia, and then brought back, you know, to Dallas. And people didn't know that, even though it's been known for decades. It never percolated into the mainstream media because they have such a, you know, they have such an allergy to anything that challenges the Warren Report.
And of course, the media is controlled. we speaks often about Operation Mockingbird, about the CIA's infiltration into the media in order to control public narrative.
You know, when Congress investigated my uncle's murder in the 1970s, the Church Committee did, and they did, you know, 2.5-year investigation, and they had many, many more documents and much more testimony available to them than the Warren Commission had. And this was a decade after the Warren Commission. They came to the conclusion that
He was talking about the Church Committee there.
And my uncle was killed by a conspiracy.
And that's basically why they had the Church Committee, because the Warren Commission, headed by Dulles, the very person that JFK fired because he was just, you know, snake of a person, got rehired to investigate JFK's assassination. I mean, how's that not a conflict of interest? So, you know, that report didn't go so well, so they came up with the Church Commission. And even there, the Church Commission said, well, you know, we're not going to say who or what, but we agree that there's a conspiracy here. So right from the get-go, they were careful to say, oh, look, it's not Russia, it's not an adversary, it's a conspiracy. But we don't have enough evidence to say who. And that mystery's been with us still to this day.
And there was a division where essentially one guy on that committee believed it was primarily the mafia. But Richard Schweitzer, the senator head of the committee, said, straight out, the CIA was involved in the murder of the President of the United States.
And this came out recently also with not only Trump telling Judge Andrew Napolitano, his friend, that he was going to release it, and then when Napolitano challenged him towards the end of his presidency to say, you said you were going to release all the files, and Trump said to him, Judge, if you knew what was in those files, you yourself could not release them, just because it would just turn everything on its head upside down, overnight. And I'm paraphrasing there a bit. And then Tucker Carlson, who's now no longer on Fox for saying certain things like this, he also said, we have people that have access to these files, and they say straight up, yeah, the CIA was totally involved, and if the American people knew, it would be possibly revolution.
Oh, if I've talked to most of the staff on that committee, and they said, yeah, and the CIA was stonewalling us the whole way through.
I
And the
wonder
actual
why.
people that the CIA appointed, George Johannides,
There's George Johannides.
who the CIA appointed as a liaison to the committee, they brought him out of retirement. He had been one of the masterminds of the assassination.
And remember, Johannides was the head of psychological operations for everything. So when we talk about all the stuff that they did in the 50s, Project Artichoke, Project MK Ultra, remember, MK Ultra was just a big umbrella of other operations, all illegal. Johannides was the kind of person that would be running something like that. And he gets the highest kinds of commendation for it,
There's no, it's impossible to even talk about the fraction of the evidence here. What I suggest to people, there are hundreds of books written about this.
So that's JFK basically talking about how he believes that the CIA is 100% responsible. At least the CIA is, maybe involving also the mafia and other people, governments. And remember that Caddy, one of the lawyers that represented the Watergate burglars, he was told that the reason that JFK was assassinated was because he wanted to share the space and UFO file with the Russians. And, that would basically bring an end to the Cold War and all the money that the CIA was making with their espionage and cooing and, just going crazy. One of the reasons. So, there's this close relationship between the CIA's rampant running around assassinating people, both civilian and foreign, in other words, American civilians and foreign adversaries and leaders, and their attempts to try and control people and governments and narrative, and that's what we are under today. So when you get this huge thing about disclosure and aliens and ancient civilizations, and maybe these people or these beings are time travelers, maybe they're humans from the future, these are all massive considerations. But remember that we have been under good almost 100 years of lies, not just psychological operations that look to see how our minds can be manipulated. In the last story time, we looked at some of the patents from every kind of every basic device around you, how the electromagnetic waves can affect your brain, and these kinds of things. This is the bread and butter of these kinds of nefarious agencies. I mean, here we're singling out the CIA. But remember, this can be used by any secret organization, whether it's government controlled or not. And often it's not controlled by anyone. They rogue, in a sense. They're not under any constitutional obligation whatsoever. So when we talk about this kind of unfettered power, this unrestricted moral, this moral black hole that, everything can just be put in. It's like the cremation of care at Bohemian Grove, which met recently, very recently. They basically create this effigy of all their problems and their sins, and then, they put it into like a child, an effigy of a child, and they burn it, and they're like, okay, well, now we can sin for the greater good again, because sometimes you got to break a few eggs to make an omelet. is there arguments, but it's not within our spiritual goodness as the human race to consider these things as normal. And that's why we started the first half of StoryTime, trying to ground ourselves on just why it's important for us to focus on ourselves and our own growth and well-being and the people around us, to ground ourselves as we are just avalanched by psychological operations and people like Joanides and Gottlieb and the CIA, dragging us off the streets at night and putting us in little rooms and pumping us full of drugs and electrodes and trying to break us down so that they can control us, if not from within our minds, from outside, from space, from the ground, from everywhere. Nothing is off the table to these kinds of people. And to really kind of wrap this up, let's look at what JFK had to say. I think he had some interesting comments about the CIA here. We'll wrap up with that.
The strength and integrity to resist the what did you call them, the salad brass and institutions like the CIA. So that makes it particularly tragic that he was killed. To what degree was the CIA involved, or the various bureaucracy involved?
Oh, sorry, we just saw this one here. Let's was this
power?
There we go.
How is it possible for them to become corrupt? And is it individuals or is it the entire institution?
Okay, so he's talking about the CIA here specifically.
Oh, it's not the entire institution. My daughter-in-law, who's helping to run my campaign, was a CIA, in the clandestine services for all of her career. She was a spy in the weapons of mass destruction program in the Mideast and in China.
My daughter.
And there's 22,000 people who work for the CIA. Probably 20,000 of those are patriotic Americans and really good public service.
So he's basically saying 10% are just doing their own thing. Most are patriotic, law-abiding citizens. But the other 10%, and they've got their own little private army.
And they're doing important work for our country. But the institution is corrupt. And because the higher ranks of the institution, and in fact, Mike Pompeo said something like this to me the other day. He was the director of the CIA. He said, when I was there, I did not do a good job of cleaning up that agency. And he said the entire upper bureaucracy of that agency are people who do not believe in the institutions of democracy. This is what he.
They don't believe in the institutions of democracy. They are a country that bases themselves as a beacon of democracy. But again, these psychopaths believe that the good outweighs the evil that they do in the long run. A very evil, it's the banality of evil in a sense.
Said to me. So I don't know if that's true, but I know that, that's significant. He's a smart person and he ran the agency and he was the Secretary of State. But it's no mystery how that happened. We know the history. The CIA was originally, first of all, there was great reluctance in 1947 that we had, for the first time, we had a secret spy agency in this country during World War II called the OSS.
Yeah, this OSS was obviously set up by the British intelligence as they handed off the flame of secret intelligence gathering and secret military. It was a British invention, and Britain was destroyed after the Second World War. They were like, well, America, we fought, but we trust each other the most, I guess. Let's show you how we've been doing these secret military armies for these last hundreds and hundreds of years, and we'll make you the bastion of the intelligence services going forward. They are the leaders of the Five Eyes, for example, and NATO, and all these other coalitions.
That was disbanded after the war because Congress said, having a secret spy agency is incompatible with a democracy.
And, you know, his uncle said this. He said, I'm paraphrasing here very poorly, but he basically said, the concept of secrecy is abhorrent to an open and free society. Yes, you need security, which means you need a bit of obfuscation for security matters, but secrecy, with no checks and balances, is a surefire way to have your government turn against you.
Secret spy agencies are things that, like the KGB, the Stasi in East Germany, Savak in Iran, and PEEP in Chile, and whatever, you know, all over the world. They're all have to do with totalitarian governments. They're not something that you can have. That it's antithetical to democracy to have that. But in 1947, we created it. Truman signed it in, but it was initially an espionage agency, which means information gathering, which is important.
Now, I want to make this point here. When he says that espionage is for information gathering, remember back in the old days, these information gathering clandestine agencies were supposed to directly report to the president so that the president could make correct decisions in times of war or possibly in times of peace. And they are not supposed to be running around conducting their own wars unbeknownst to the president. But Eisenhower was one of the first to say that the military-industrial complex has run away with itself. It's well-funded, it's got its own army, own air force, own operations. They can't rein it in. And he said, you know, we're under threat. So that problem hasn't gone away, it's just gotten worse.
It's to get to gather and consolidate information from many, many different sources from all over the world, and then put those in reports so the White House, so the president can make good decisions based upon valid information, evidence-based, you know, decision-making. But Allen Dulles, who was essentially the first head of the agency, made a series of legislative machinations and political machinations that gave additional powers to the agency and opened up the what they called then the plans division, which is the plans division is the dirty tricks, it's the black ops.
Now, that's what he's talking about. The plans division is basically where before the president would say, CIA, you've given me information. Now we can decide better what to do. The plans division is like, well, these are the things that we can and will do, and then maybe we'll brief the president, you know. Maybe we shouldn't brief the president because it's illegal and we want plausible deniability. There have been times in the past where presidents have said, get it done, I don't want to know how, make sure it happens. Because if you tell me how it's done, then I'm implicated. In the court of law, if I don't know, I can't lie to them. I'm just going to say, I don't know. That's what plausible deniability is. And they hide behind that as the shield of secrecy from their illegal activities.
Fixing elections, murdering what they call executive action, which means killing.
That's assassination.
Foreign leaders, and making small wars, and bribing and blackmailing.
Small wars are known as limited conflicts, and again, if you create them, if you put arms in a country that's not very stable, and then it breaks out, and then you say, president that's about to be overthrown, give us a tap on the shoulder and we'll come and rescue you and your political regime, and they create the problem and then become the solution for it, and then get the kind of foreign policy that they want out of it. Not that the president wants anymore, but that the intelligence agencies do.
People stealing elections and that kind of thing. And the reason at that time, we were in the middle of the Cold War.
And sorry, just this quick point about when he says that the CIA is capable of stealing elections. Let's remember that the whole thing in Ukraine began with the Maidan coup, where the whole tension of the Ukrainian people to join or not join the EU was hijacked by these people that, then got snipers in, and then there was it was just like mindless bloodshed, and people started accusing each other, and they fettered that violence and fanned it into something bigger so that they could then oust the president at the time. I think it was Yanukovych or whoever it was. So we know that was a Newland-sponsored, West-backed coup on the Ukrainian people and its government back then. So, if you think that he's only referring to stuff back then in South America and in parts of Europe and Africa, well, guess what? It includes everywhere, just absolutely everywhere.
And
still to this
Truman
day.
and Eisenhower did not want to go to war. They didn't want to commit troops. And it seemed to them that, this was a way of kind of fighting the Cold War secretly and doing it at minimal cost by changing events sort of invisibly. And so it was seductive to them.
Changing events invisibly is seductive to them because, again, if you're a political leader and you can get your intelligence services to overthrow a government without having to go to war with them, then, that person just fell over, and look, the person we were friendly with happens to now be president. And again, let me just remind you, the whole reason that the current conflict in Ukraine offends my absolute senses, I mean, not only because of the senseless bloodshed between the Ukrainians and the Russians, and I really do mean that is absolutely senseless, but it's the gall that the American and the Western powers have to fight their proxy wars through these countries. And, as I said, everything that was once conspiracy theory was just actually clandestine operations that we now know about. Before they were like, oh, no American troops there. Oh, now there are. No NATO weapons. Oh, now there's NATO weapons. I'm not phrasing this correctly, but what I'm trying to say is that the whole war in Ukraine is a giant op. There have been many attempts to create peace that have been torpedoed. There are many instances where just money gets thrown into a black hole and it doesn't ever reach the people that need it for rebuilding and for, it just gets thrown into wars, which the only people that really benefit from that are the arms manufacturers. And again, it's all an op. Newland and Macron and at the time it was Angela Merkel basically said, we're trying to overthrow Russia. That's the whole point of fighting Russia in Ukraine. It's to try and create regime change to overthrow Putin because he's a thorn in our side. So they're not there to fight some great holy battle or some thing for freedom and democracy. No, they're there just to make sure that Putin is as undermined as possible. Regime change at its maximum, at the expense of the lives of innocent people. It's just disgusting. So that's what we're dealing with in 2023. Let's finish up here.
But everybody, Congress, when they first voted it in place, Congress, both political parties said, if we create this thing, it could turn into a monster and it could undermine our values. And today it's so powerful, and then nobody knows what its budget is. Plus, it has its own investment fund, In-Q-Tel, which has invested, made, I think, 2,000 investments in Silicon Valley.
So what he's saying here is that the CIA, so the military gets given a black budget that they don't announce because obviously you don't tell the enemy how you're spending your money for your research or your arms or your defense. It makes sense. You kind of obfuscate that. But that black budget, there's a deeper black budget. In other words, when these intelligence agencies in these parts of the military commit illegal trades, like, they deal drugs or they deal arms or they traffic people or whatever the case is, it's illegal. They steal bank accounts, they sequestrate things, they do whatever they can because the law is below them. They're above it. That's how they get money that the Congress has no idea about. When they infiltrate companies and you say, oh, this company went bankrupt because their information got hacked. Oh, how did it get hacked? Oh, the engineer, oh, shame, accidentally they got into his phone. How do you know that engineer wasn't working for the CIA and like was planted to, extract information, make a bunch of money, siphon it off and say, oh, it was a North Korean hacker that just, ransomware. Oops. We have no idea the kind of operations that these people do to make streams of money, like the opium wars in Afghanistan. Notice that America got kicked out and the opium has decreased. How funny is that? I'm not saying that that's directly correlative, but it's just interesting that it has this relationship, doesn't it? But this is the point, is that there's a black budget even deeper than the black budget. There's the official black budget, and then there's the really dark black budget, which, I mean, just think about when we're going back to the UAP stuff. You're a defense contractor, and a part of the military or some foreign adversary or some just rich gazillionaire says, I want to know how that happens. Here's more money than you know what to do with. They're a private defense contractor. Maybe they might just give away national secrets. Maybe they won't. Maybe they'll find a way to bring that person in. What I'm trying to say here is that there's just an infinite amount of things that these agencies do unbeknownst to us. And they can make tons of money because they got the inside scoop. They know, they can see your hand. And then you're playing against them, and obviously they can win every single time. And what JFK Jr. is talking about here is In-Q-Tel, which is also just a shell, the shell company that the CIA sets up. And In-Q-Tel used to be highly involved in the telecommunications back in the day, and then we found out it was CIA. Anyways, it's now still around, and it's invested heavily in a lot of tech companies, Google, Amazon. It's got a finger in all the pies. And so you can see how it looks like a company. It's got a CEO, it's got incomes and stuff like that, but then you see that it also has this history of being just a front for activities with the CIA so that they can get embedded in all these mass media and technology companies. That's what RFK is saying to us very, very plainly. I love that he's not beating around the bush.
Oh, it has ownership of a lot of these tech companies and a lot of the CEOs of those tech companies.
And that's why the Democrats now want to do a major investigation into BlackRock and Vanguard. I mean, these two companies basically own a share of almost everything in the world. But how and when? And, there's a lot of shady business going there, especially when you look at BlackRock in the Ukraine. And BlackRock just filed for bankruptcy, How is that possible? It owns everything, implodes communities by just buying out houses and real estate and companies and all these things, and yet it's got no money. Very interesting.
Have signed state secrecy agreements with the CIA, which if they even reveal that they have signed that, they can go to jail for 20 years and have their assets removed, etc.
So what he's saying there is that people like Mark Zuckerberg, let's use him as an example, they've got non-disclosure agreements with these intelligence agencies. Like, for example, when Elon Musk pointed out when he bought Twitter that, there's some FBI shenanigans going on here. There's some people that are embedded in Twitter that are involved with the FBI, that are backpedaling information to the DNC and other Republican people, and then there's some collusion going on here. So tech companies are infiltrated by the FBI, and if you take someone like Mark Zuckerberg, what RFK Jr. is saying is, like, someone like Mark Zuckerberg, as powerful as he is, because he's touching on such massive personal data that is necessary for weaponization if you want to do these big AI military data sets or spying or whatever the case is, he's useful for their security needs, and so he signs an NDA. And that NDA says that he can't even talk about the fact that he signed an NDA. So Mark Zuckerberg will be like, oh, yeah, well, we had a data breach. Oh, no, yeah, we might be spying on you in certain ways, or your data might go to, Cambridge Analytica or something like that. Or the CIA, if they ask, we might have a very close relationship with them. But he can't outright say that because they muffle him. Same kind of thing with all these tech companies. Bezos, Musk. Musk can't talk to you about the non-disclosure agreements he's got with the CIA or the Air Force or Space Force, for putting sensitive platforms up in orbit. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. This is the nature of being rich and powerful and having a military come visit you and tell you how the game works.
The influence that the agency has, the capacity to influence events at every level in our country, is really frightening. And then for most of its life, the CIA was banned from propagandizing Americans. But we learned that they were doing it anyway. So in 1973, during the Church Committee hearings, we learned that the
propaganda basically means lying to your people to make them believe a certain narrative.
CIA had a program called Operation Mockingbird.
And now we've spoken about Mockingbird before. This is basically how they infiltrated the media companies so that they can control the narrative. I'm just going to jump ahead here a little bit.
President Obama changed the law to make it legal now for the CIA to propagandize Americans.
Yeah, and this was in 2016 because what happened was they were blasting propaganda and false information to the communist enemy in Cuba, even though like in 2016, not really enemies at that point. But again, they were trying to undermine that Cuban government, and so they were blasting this propaganda, which unfortunately using these radio waves was being picked up by American citizens, which, as JFK mentioned, was illegal under American law. So Obama kind of changed up those laws a little bit to allow propaganda, and that's when things like fake news, misinformation, disinformation suddenly just run rampant. That's where it comes onto the picture. Now that becomes an acceptable thing for government to do, is to misinform, disinform, and malinform people. It's terrible.
And I think, we can't look at the Ukraine war and how that was, how the narrative has been formed in the minds of Americans.
And now, I'm just going to link this back to something else he said. He said one of the things that his uncle was really sad about and regretted was the fact that he got huge swaths of his citizens to go and do these bunker nuclear drills, even children, hammering this idea that they could survive a nuclear blast by just putting sharp objects away and, putting their heads under their desks. Because you realize it's a psyop. It's not real. It's something that these militaries will do to make the minds of people malleable. So this evening we've looked at a real spectrum of how the attack on the human mind is done by these militaries and these organizations and parts of government and things like that. That's why we need to keep sharp. That's also why I went on quite a rant about having good spiritual guidance and grounding. And I don't care what religion you're from. When I say spiritual guidance, think of it as psychological guidance and grounding. And this is also why I mentioned why we are, as beings on this planet, so special to the universe. Not that we are better and more special than other life forms, but we must respect ourselves if we're ever to get off our knees and not allow this kind of terrible manipulation of our culture, of our history, to befall us. Our history really has been taken away from us and written by victors that have not kept a straight story. We're kept ignorant. And this is the closing idea that I just want to finish off with as we end story time number 17. As we talk about this great awakening, more information is coming forward, whether it's about corruption, whether about the truth of our place in the universe and other life forms and beings, or even our ancient history. What are they finding in these dig sites? What happened to these ancient civilizations before the Ice Age that were building megaliths and and knew about star systems before we had telescopes and things like that. How does this all fit together? Because if we don't know where we came from, we don't know where we're heading. And so disclosure on many levels is necessary. But with that will come a sewerage pipe full of lies, because all of it's been covered up and used and weaponized against us. So this is the important thing, is to keep grounding. Because, as I said, you can't really control what they blast into you, but you can, from within yourself, use logic and reasoning and just build a nice foundation. And by this I mean that if you look after yourself and you harness good things, good relationships, good actions, good thoughts, good words, you try and work in that direction, even if all the stuff you believe, aliens, government conspiracies, even if all of that then turned out to be false, you've still led a good life and a healthy life, a connected life with the people around you. Even that in itself sounds like a healthy endeavor. But it becomes more important when you're actually a little bit more switched on and you see how deep we are submerged in just absolute lies and corruption and illegality. Then suddenly that kind of looking after yourself and cultivating goodness, both in yourself and in your family and community and your friends, that becomes an act of resistance at this kind of phase. And it acts as a beacon, because no matter what they throw at you, true or untrue, whether it's we're at the bottom of the food chain and food for the aliens, or whether we're psychologically powerful beings like the X-Men and we're, approaching some kind of evolution change where we go from 2 strands to 12 in our DNA, and I don't know, whatever, I'm making things up, but I'm saying whatever the outcome is, that same application of trying to have a good foundation will guide you, whether the reality is that it's a whole government conspiracy and the world is not as it seems, or that the world is truly, the truth is going to be stranger than fiction. And so to have the strength, but also the malleability, we have to keep an open mind and our feet firmly planted, psychologically, spiritually, and in a sense, physically speaking, So, ladies and gentlemen, this is where we're going to end Storytime 17. I want to remind you guys that you are all incredible, incredible pieces of creation, the most magical chemical factories of the most complex nature in the universe that we know of, basically. And our intelligence, although sometimes limited in comparison to the analytical thinking that a computer and AI can do, is still vastly creative and difficult to understand, let alone replicate. So there's something inherent there that we should be proud of and harness. It is the foundation of our being on this planet. And that's why you're all amazing. And I love that I've been able to share this really deep rabbit hole of how we've been abused, that beautiful thing about our minds and our creativity and our connection to reality through that experience that we have. We really have been abused by just agencies and governments and tyranny as they've tried to pull us away from what is our rightful ancestry, in a sense, this place that we have in the world. They've tried to deny us this important link, because this kind of strengthens and bonds us and makes us better than we were before. It gives us a way to, together we are stronger moving forward. And so if we kept divided, then other forces can supersede us on top. So, this is why I want to hammer this point home, that we're all made of stardust. If we all come from the very elements that were born in the heart of a star. Without that, we wouldn't all be here. So we're all made of the same stuff. We're all occupying the same reality. Even if aliens are real, they also have to understand the deep philosophical implications of being a creation in this universe. what is their sense of God? What is their sense of goodness? What is their sense of becoming and growing? We need to ask these ideas, we need to ask these concepts of ourselves and form our own ideas. It's more important than ever because, as I said, the disclosure, the truth, the vast possibilities that the human race stands on the precipice of is now real. It's front and center. So now's the time for an awakening. And with that, I mean, it's time to really start to look inwards and outwards and begin to align to make a geometry that we can be proud of, both personally and in terms of what we see around us. You look around the world and you see it's not colorful enough. People aren't happy enough. People aren't organized enough trying to do good things. That's some of the geometry that needs to be fixed. And that's our real purpose, whether aliens are real or not. That good spiritual grounding will guide us. Even if aliens aren't real and the government tries to lie to us and deceive us, that grounding will serve us well. And then, of course, if all of that is true, the most amazing sci-fi stories might be awaiting humanity in the future. And even then, it will serve us well to be well grounded and well connected to each other. So I love you all and have a great week coming forward. Thank you for joining me for StoryTime 17. This is where we're going to sign off. And we'll be back next week with surely more interesting topics, because every week there's just more and more crazy things going on. So this is your friendly Euphoria signing off, and just wishing you an excellent start to the grind ahead. We touched on some really interesting topics this evening. You can catch us again, as I said, next week. You can write us at theprimematterpodcast@gmail.com. You'll see this Twitch stream put up on YouTube at the Prime Matter Podcast if you want to do a little bit of a rerun, if you missed any parts of it, if you joined a little bit early or a little bit late, or you just want to study it piece by piece, whatever the case is, it'll be put up there for you guys as well. Thank you all so much for joining us, and yeah, great love and light. We'll see you all in the next episode. Catch you soon. Peace.